There was a lot of controversy about open carry. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Is that legal now, illegal? I know that open carry, first of all, let's explain what open carry means.
Well, open carry, the way it was originally looked at, open carry would be carrying a firearm in a handgun in a holster, and the ammunition would be separate from the firearm. In other words, if you were carrying a semi-automatic, you could carry that openly in a holster, and you could have the magazines loaded in magazine pouches on the other side of your hip. There couldn't be anything in the chamber of the gun, and there could be no magazine in that gun. And that, caused quite a stir when people were doing that. But it was allowed. There was no ordinance against that. Well, they've since, plugged that hole. So now it is illegal to do that. You cannot open carry a handgun anymore in the state of California, and they just passed out of the Senate a bill that will disallow you to open carry a long gun.
Meaning?
A rifle or a shotgun.
Okay, and let's going back to schools carrying these weapons. How do these kids get these weapons? I mean, obviously they're not of age to go and purchase them.
Well, they get them in a number of ways. Parents that don't keep their firearms locked up, the kids will take them, bring them to school. Guns are stolen in burglaries. There's a multitude of ways. They're stolen out of cars. There's plenty of firearms that are floating around that shouldn't be floating around, and kids get them. Because one kid knows a kid who knows a guy. There's always the guy. And that's what happens, and these kids get these guns, and some of them really don't know what's going on. It looks cool. It's kind of like they're into video games, and so they don't really associate the firearm with the lethality aspect of it. They're kind of like disenfranchised from that.
If someone were to find a gun, what is the procedure of, what would they do? I mean, should they register it, turn it in? I mean, what do they do?
Well, first of all, we have to kind of clarify who's finding this. Is it a kid or is it an adult?
Either one.
Well, if if an adult finds a firearm, I mean, it would depend on
the type.
Well, no, it would depend on how knowledgeable that individual was with a firearm. Okay, if the person had, an understanding of firearms, they could then take that firearm and turn it into a police department if they knew how to unload it and make the gun safe. I would not suggest walking into a police department with a gun. That's really going to give somebody a bad moment, and probably the person carrying that gun. But you notify the police and you say, look, I found this gun. Okay. If you're a kid, the NRA, the Ed Eagle program says, don't touch the gun, get a hold of an adult, do it that way. It's really it depends on where the gun's found. It depends on who found the gun, and there's a whole lot of other circumstances involved in that. But rule of thumb is if you don't know what you're doing with a gun, don't touch it. All right, you can do more damage by fooling around with a gun that you don't know anything about than you can by just leaving it alone.
One question, if somebody wants to become either a deputy sheriff or any type of law enforcement, a lot of questions were, what type of training do you think a potential police officer to be?
Well, I think that police academies like to train their own recruits.
Right.
It's kind of like that blank sheet of paper, and the recruit hasn't developed any bad habits that they have to be, that have to be unlearned. So that's really a tough one. However, liking guns is a real plus. Okay, now that may sound silly, but I cannot tell you how many deputy sheriffs, police officers I've run into who hate guns. They want to be social workers. Well, they got in the wrong line because, a peace officer does that. He keeps the peace. Okay, the peace officer's job is to apprehend criminals and deal with stolen property, and when possible, return stolen property to its rightful owner. Okay, social working is a whole different program, not to be confused with law enforcement.
Very true. Your expertise in firearms and in your current position as far as what you do now, how is it different? Let's talk a little bit about your background.
Well, again, I specialize in what would be referred to as the defensive use of lethal force. I'm working on a case right now that obviously I can't go into details with, but it involves an individual who used a firearm and is claiming self-defense. Well, there's a whole bunch of things that go into a self-defense plea, if you will. And that's what I do. I specialize in those kinds of things, use of force, if you will, whether it be with, handguns, knives, anything like that.
Well, we were talking about just guns, but your expertise on other types of assault weapons, which would be, let's say, knives and guns and other things. These kids, more to go into safety of the kids, what would you suggest parents to be more aware of?
Well, as far as, are we talking about like...
what should a parent do? What could a parent do besides if they are not that knowledgeable about gun safety themselves?
Well, again, I'm a member of the NRA, but I'm not, this is not an NRA commercial, okay? But there is the NRA, there is the California Pistol and Rifle Association. There are a lot of these groups that have classes, if you will, that can, help orient people, regarding firearms. And not necessarily to how to use them, but to how to handle them properly and know when somebody is mishandling a firearm. It's just a lot of it is common sense, but until you really get into a class that talks about it, a lot of people they just don't know. So I would suggest doing that. You really need to, gun-proof your children. You really do, especially in this day and age.
And how does a parent, if we have a lot of guns in the house, what's the best way? Put them in a safe? Put them in
Yeah, you need to really, any gun that you're not using, you need to really lock up. And it needs to be, and you have to, by law, make your firearms safe and non-accessible or inaccessible to children or anyone who comes into your home. You cannot leave firearms loose around the house. You just can't do that. So it depends on how big your collection is. You either get a safe, or you can get what's referred to as a lockbox that you can keep the firearm in.
And I think that's what's required when you're actually going and buying one. I think you
have to show proof of a DOJ, that would be Department of Justice, approved lockbox, or lock.
And as far as going back to the child safety, would you feel that kids nowadays are more accessible to these guns? Is it easy for them to get guns? Is that what's going on with all the activities of the schools?
I don't think the accessibility is any greater today than it was years ago. The only thing I can tell you is that the dynamics, in society have changed. When I was a kid, you were really cool if you carried a pocket knife to school. Nobody ever thought about using it for anything, but it was just a cool thing to do.
Right.
Nobody carried guns. That was just, no, that just didn't happen. Not where I went to school.
Right.
All right. So I don't think that there's more accessibility to guns. I think because a lot of the video games that are out there, a lot of the movies that the kids are exposed to, I think they're more aware of guns, and so I think that a lot of kids seek out guns because they're more aware of them.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, it is unfortunate. I was raised around guns, and I was raised to respect guns, and I never had a problem with firearms, and it was like not a real big deal. We never thought about ever using a gun to hurt somebody. We'd go target practice, or maybe go hunting or something like that. But we never had the intention of hurting anybody with a firearm.
Now, as far as somebody that wants to purchase a gun, um, could you tell us a little bit about how to choose the right proper type of gun?
Excuse me?
Type of gun to
Oh,
purchase
I
as far
see.
as like.
Okay, well, I do get asked that a lot, and I kind of look at it this way. I kind of relate it to cars. I know that sounds a little silly, but hopefully it won't sound as silly when I get done with the explanation.
Sorry.
The way I look at it this way: there are people who buy cars. They're not enthusiasts. They buy a car because they need a car to get from point A to point B, but they don't particularly. Cars are not their hobbies. So when somebody comes to me and says, I want a gun for self-defense, but I really don't. I'm not really into guns, but I feel the need to have a gun for self-defense. I recommend a revolver for a couple of reasons. One, it's very easy to check to make sure that it is unloaded. And to operate it is extremely easy. There are very few things to go wrong with it. It is not a complicated piece of equipment, and it will serve you well. Revolvers have been keeping people alive ever since their invention. So then I say to the other people, and who says, well, I'm an enthusiast. Well, if you like cars, if you like sports cars, and you're willing to put the time in to learn the idiosyncrasies and the more complex manipulating skills that are required to operate the sports car, i.e. the semi-automatic firearm, then I say, fine, get the semi-automatic firearm. Just know that you're going to have to learn. There are going to be more things to learn about that firearm as far as its operation is concerned. And if you're going to use any of these firearms for self-defense, all of those operations have to be committed to your subconscious. Your subconscious has to work in conjunction with your conscience or your conscious mind. So your conscious mind is looking for cover and looking for the best defensive position to get in, while your subconscious mind is operating the gun in the sense of, reloading it, re-racking the slide, and doing all of the other tasks that are required, of a firearm, of a higher capacity.
How about for girls? What would be a good one for self-defense for ladies?
Well, I think something in pink. Seriously, there's no difference. There's really no difference. Firearms are not really gender specific.
No. Well, what I meant for the kick.
Well, you would be surprised. Women can handle, very powerful handguns if they're taught how to handle it correctly. It's if you're not taught how to handle a firearm correctly, the recoil is going to bother you no matter really what caliber the gun is. People will ask me, well, what caliber gun should I get? And I tell them, well, I would say that you should probably get the biggest caliber that you can reliably hit a target with. You can have a .44 Magnum, but if you miss, it's not going to do much good. If you can reliably hit a target with a .38, get the .38. The whole idea is to stop an adversary's assaultive behavior. And it's not done with the noise from the gun.
Thank you. I really appreciate all the knowledge. I would love to have you back for some more expert ideas and everything else with the new laws that are changing, because I know that legislation and Senate, they change every single day, as you were saying, rules and regulations.
Oh yes, no,
change.
there's no end to the punishing of the law-abiding citizen.
Well, thank you for watching Lights on LA. Please watch us next week with a new episode. Thank you.